There was a terrible murder in our community. I was still invited to go and view the body. It just wasn't hidden. As a single parent myself, I've often found myself thinking, where is the support? But it's like if we can't fix it, we don't go anywhere near it. We've forgotten how to participate. We've forgotten how to be with each other, to companion each other. People didn't really want to talk about what happens when you die. People wanted to talk about the people that they had lost.
Don't Be Caught Dead, the show bringing stories of death back to life. Here's your host, Catherine Ashton.
Today I'm speaking with Emma Beattie. Emma is the founder of Before and After Life and is part of the social justice movement dedicated to activating change. She is a pioneer in reimagining how people, communities, and workplaces can prepare, adapt, and respond to the impacts of caring, dying, and grieving. Her professional origins sit in creative strategy, storytelling, and social impact. Emma has worked, studied, and volunteered in deathing since 2020. Emma brings an animistic, creative, and poetic lens to the terrain, and her work intersects a long line of personal loss. Prioritising generous and sustainable care, she is trained, supported, and supervised. Emma is a member of Palliative Care New South Wales, NDAN, the Natural Death Advocacy Network, the Ethics Centre, and hosts Regard with Emma on Bay FM 99.9 and is an advocate for Passionate Communities Australia. Thank you so much for being with me today, Emma.
Oh, I'm looking forward to our conversation, Catherine.
So we had the pleasure of meeting last year at Sydney Death and Dying Festival. We were sitting next to each other in the poetry session with Luke Fisher, I believe.
I saw that you just interviewed Luke recently.
I did. And it was absolutely fantastic to reconnect with him and get more insight to what was behind his poetry. So tell me, I'd love to learn more about you and what got you started.
What got me started? To really kind of, to go back to the origins, I grew up in New Zealand and death and dying in New Zealand was omnipresent. For me, my mum was very involved in our community, and death and dying had been kind of hidden for her. And so she decided that when she was raising children, she didn't want that to be the case. And so we were very hands-on and involved in our community. So I built a capacity for it, and monkey see, monkey do, it was modeled to me. And so, yeah, there was, as I said, a long, long line of loss and big initiations along the way. And then you go out in the world and live your life, and nothing really kind of happens, not too much anyway. But then we had a dear friend of ours, Heather, who was dying, and I went back to New Zealand and spent some time with her and my mum. And I went, wow, maybe I could do palliative care. This feels like the right kind of space for me. But I let that thought go. And that was in my kind of mid to late 20s. And then I returned to that thought when a girlfriend of mine, her mum was end of life, and the experience was not great. And I felt really helpless, and I didn't feel like I had a language for supporting her. And so I started at the library and just ravenously went through all the books, and it just kind of stuck. And then I started studying with Griffith Uni, and trained with Zenith Virago, did a local last aid course, and then started volunteering with Amadeus Home Hospice Service. And I was already caring for a number of ageing Australians in our community. And then I was introduced to an Indigenous elder and started walking with him through his dying time. And, these opportunities, I think, just came and one thing led to another. And then when I got to the point where I thought, I can't do any more volunteering. I'm a sole parent and there's only so much time in the week. And so I turned towards the community and said, what is needed? And that's where it started.
Wow, there is so many things that you have just said there in your process and your journey that you've gone through that I have so many questions about. So, firstly, take me back to when you say your mum was involved in the community and you were being involved in death and dying at what stage? What did that look like?
That would just be that if somebody was unwell, we were there. We would take meals. Mum would run the mow around the lawns or do some like housework. Or my grandparents were from a farming community, and so everybody helped each other. And then we moved to a small seaside village. And again, it was just a very small community, and mum was just very alive in that community, always caring and tending, whether they were sick or whether they were dying. And then when people died, we brought them home. We were involved. I had a dear family friend of ours. He was like a brother to me, and he died when I was 14 in a car accident. And it's like the community rallied around. I was cared for. I was taken by another family friend, would take me out on the motorbike. The guy's dad, Aiden's, his name was Aiden's dad, came and spent time with me in his grief. He came to, so there was just, I don't know, there was presence. Even as a very, very young child, if there was a death of a pet, I remember burying my goldfish in a matchbox underneath the hollyhocks out the front of my stepfather's home brew shed. There was an honouring, I guess, and nothing was hidden from us. There was a terrible murder in our community, and I was still invited to go and view the body, and it just wasn't hidden. It was hands-on, it was participatory. We were involved no matter the age, and I believe still that's what has often held me in good stead for loss, a cumulative loss
Mm.
over the years. And I model the same to my child. Mm.
And tell me, when you went to the library and started to sort of think, okay, well, I'll do a bit more research on this topic, what were some of those books that you first picked out and one of the ones that resonated with you? Can you recall any of the names?
The very, very first one was Molly Carlisle's book. And it was a book of short stories of lots of different experiences. And I don't know, it just felt good. It's a very strange thing to say about death and dying, but it felt true. And yeah, gosh, I can't even remember now some of the books. Being Mortal, Atul Gawande, that was pretty early on. Stephen Jenkinson's book Die Wise was absolutely pivotal to my work and my thinking and the kind of embodied experience. Um,
Can you talk us through a little bit about why and what that meant to you and how that has actually become quite significant for you?
his work,
Yeah.
he's a wordsmith. He uses etymology a lot. So it's like, what does this really mean? So that line of curiosity just like enraptures me. I love that. I love words and language and I guess what Stephen does is he turns everything on its head and he questions everything. And that's what I found I was doing when I came to his work was there has to be a different way, there has to be a better way. And what I also noticed about his work was that it was very, very enmeshed with entangled with the natural world and with this reciprocity for place and that he wasn't somebody who was just this kind of sage on stage spouting stuff. That he has his own hardships, he has his own multiplicity of loss and grief, and he walks his talk.
And you say that just then you said that there has to be a better way. What had you seen was a way that you weren't liking what you were seeing? What it was that you were thinking there needs to be a better way as opposed to what you were experiencing?
Oh, so much. I mean, the medical system does a really, really good job, and I'm grateful to them. But there's also a point where people, otherwise known as patients, lose their agency, lose their autonomy, and they kind of just go into a system and are seen as data, a set of symptoms and data. And I believe that we can do a better job in considering the whole person and thinking about what is this system that people are spinning around in. An example of that, a girlfriend of mine has breast cancer at the moment, and I said, "Were you given any information about aftercare?" No, not one piece of information about how to tend her body after her operation. And I just went, do you know how much information is out there? It was like she wasn't even informed to do some lymphatic drainage. And I just went, a little bit like IVF. We know doing IVF, that acupuncture, this is science. The research shows, and this is why you have acupuncture clinics beside IVF clinics, because they can go from one to the other. Now we know that after surgery and with breast cancer, that lymphatic drainage helps. And she just wasn't told. And I just think, yeah, we can do a much better job with the systems that we have and thinking about the whole person and bringing in therapies that can support, or not even therapies, but people and tools and resources and supports that support the whole person. And you see this also in death. We go into a really traditional ceremony, and how is that really honoring the ways that we know that person? Maybe there's a bottle of plonk, on the coffin, or maybe there's their favorite song, but we can do a better job at that. And we can train more people to be funeral celebrants. We can do a better job at honoring the people that we love. We don't have to just rest in what we know. We can be more imaginative.
And I'd love for you to talk us through, you always refer or you use a phrase caring, deathing, grieving. And tell me about how you've changed that in that process, how you can lead people to do better things around caring, deathing, and grieving.
Well, when I read the statistics on caring and how 7 out of 10 carers in Australia are women and the impacts of that, I found it shocking to begin with, really shocking. And I thought, where is the support for carers? As a single parent myself, I've often found myself thinking, where is the support? And then as I was walking with people and families at the end of life, you really see how small people's lives become, and people feel awkward and they're not there for each other. This is the independent lives that we're all supposed to be aspiring to, but really we need to be interdependent. We need each other, but it's not really celebrated or revered in the dominant kind of cultural narrative. We live alone, we make our own meals or we eat out, lots of things are outsourced. Anyway, but to come back to caring, I just thought there's an invitation to turn towards each other more than what we do. And why isn't that happening? And it's important that we care for our carers. It's important that we show up and turn up for each other more than we do. And so then the deathing or the dying and the deathing, again, people's worlds get so small. People don't have a language for how to be there. They feel awkward or like they might be not welcome because it's a quiet time. People are busy in their lives. And I just thought we can do this better, again, if we're turning towards each other. And then as I was going to death cafes and tending people and families and volunteering, what I noticed was the grieving element, similar to what you and I were talking about earlier on. The grieving element is a huge part of how well we care and die, and how well we travel through the bereavement process, or experience, rather, not process, through the bereavement experience. And so what I noticed was like people didn't really want to talk about what happens when you die. People didn't really want to talk about specific case examples of symptoms or symptom management or anything like that. People wanted to talk about the people that they had lost, the people that had been lost from them and that they had never mourned. The perinatal loss for many, many women that had never been acknowledged and tended or shared. The siblings your sibling loss, death by suicide, sudden death, dementia being the leading cause of death in Australia for women now, the grieving process that happens as the person that we love is still here but not there. So grief was a huge part of it. And I thought, we've forgotten how to participate. We've forgotten how to be with each other, to companion each other. And I know that I have a fix-it bone in my body that I need to really keep in check. But it's like if we can't fix it, we don't go anywhere near it. We go in the other direction. And yeah, the invitation, I think, Catherine, is what happens if we show up to each other? What happens if we care for each other and tend each other all the way through that terrain, through caring, dying, and grieving? And what happens if we share those roles, that it's not just on one or two people? And they
Yep.
all just seem to feed into each other. Like they seemed inextricably linked to me. It's like I didn't want to just go and be a funeral celebrant and show up at the table and have a cup of tea and write the notes and then not that lots of celebrants are more hands-on, but some celebrants you dip in and you dip out. And it's like actually the richness of what this work offers me, offers us, is a depth of relationship because you're having really truthful, vulnerable, tender conversations. And in a time when people are so desperately hungry and desperately lonely for each other, this is the place that we can reconnect and relearn how to be with each other.
And how does your connection with nature influence the way in which you support people through that experience? Or it's interesting because I liked the fact that you didn't use the word process when you talked about grief, but the fact that it's actually an experience. And I think that's a lovely way to phrase it. And it is an experience, not a process that you move through because it's never linear. But yeah, so how do you use your connection with nature to help with that?
Oh, so many ways. We've lost touch, I think, with nature. I mean, we tend to kind of put ourselves at the apex, but actually we are the river. If the river is sick, then we are sick. If we don't have any bees, we don't have any food. We are so inextricably linked in the natural world we are of. Our bodies are 70% water, water that's been cycling on this earth for over 4 billion years. When you think about your tears that you're crying and you wipe your tears away, that is holy. That is like such an incredible thing to think that salty water is over 4 billion. Those tears have been cried again and again and again and again. So there's this idea of us being of nature. It just holds me. I think I mentioned my grandparents had a farm in New Zealand, so I grew up in nature. I grew up in a little village and we had the Kakanoi Ranges, the beach 5 minutes down the road, and the river mouth that ran through the village. And we run amok. Everything was nature. Our toys were nature. We used to have these flax swords and everything we ate from the garden because you couldn't afford to not. So I just grew up with the essence of me being of the land. And I think my dear friend Cam, actually, he always used to say, Em, no matter what happens, it's like you just somehow land on your feet. And I think that that is because of my connection to nature, that I feel that that's what I'm of. And so in my work, you meet with somebody at the end of life and they want the hospital room or they want the room in the house that overlooks the trees so they can watch the birds, they can watch the light, they can hear the wind. Things get very, very simple, and that's what people are looking out for. And that's what we, in our very hurried and rushed ways, forget to take time for. So if I'm tending, often a group or an individual, often we'll meet outside. I have this wonderful woman that I meet with weekly, and no matter the weather, and we've been out with our umbrellas, sitting on our rugs with the everything kind of wrapped around us in the rain, just in the elements. It's Thich Nhat Hanh says that the cream of his lifetime's work was his connection to ground. And I think when you kind of bring it back to something as simple but so sturdy as where do I connect with the earth? Where do I connect with the ground? That's steady. That's a steady place. It's a place that won't let you down. You can always come back to that. If you forget to breathe, you remember, my feet are on the ground, or my hands and knees are on the ground, or my back is on the ground, or my belly is on the ground. Yeah, no, I mean, I also think it plays into the storytelling, the mythology that happens through these experiences of caring and dying and deathing and grieving. The stories, it's somebody will say, oh, there was the most beautiful rainbow on the day that we buried so and so, or hauled my sorry body out of bed and I made my coffee and I sat in the sun, and that's as much as I did that day. But a magpie came and serenaded me, or I saw a kookaburra. I've been in groups where that kind of nature symbolism comes through, and somebody will say, oh, I saw blah. And then somebody else will, it'll popcorn around the room. Somebody else will say, oh, I did too on that day. Oh, me too. And then suddenly we have something, a kernel, a seed that we can carry forward in the storytelling of this time in our lives. So nature, yeah, it's everything.
And what about the role of ritual? What do you feel that that plays?
It's also everything, especially nature ritual is everything. And I don't mean that it needs to be some spectacular mandala made from foraged objects, or, you know, these small rituals can be really, really deeply meaningful and offer us a ballast, a kind of a steadying through caring and through dying and through grief. So whether it's through vigil, or whether it's through ceremony, or whether it's something that you do after loss, and it might be very simple. It might just be when my dear friend Ange died, we were very, very old friends. And when she died about a year and a half ago, it was bucketing rain, and I couldn't get up to her funeral. And so I took my daughter and we took all the flowers from the garden and a piece of bamboo, and I just wrapped it, tied it, and filled it with flowers. And we went for a bushwalk and we sent it out into the dam. And very simple thing, nothing grand, nothing exceptional, but a walk to reflect, some color. She was a really vibrant woman. And in winter, I use my granddad's teacup that I grew up with. His birthday is in July, and in the winter, I use the winter teacup. And in the springtime, I use the daffodil teacup. And that wasn't his, I found it in an op shop. But it speaks to me of, I can reflect on all the spring lambs that we used to go out and check on. Or sometimes we'll have a piece of Turkish delight, or these things don't need to be huge and big. I have rituals of burning sage every day. We always have candles with dinner. They can be really, really small things. There was a man that I cared for, and after he died, it's a poinciana tree, and the poinciana tree burst. It was so vibrant, and it has all of this moss and these ferns and stuff all over it, and so that became his tree. That's his tree, and so I go to that tree now. It's a place to go to. Ritual, it's fortifying, it's steadying, it's honoring a very, very dear friend of our family, Liz, who told me that as she was coming into land, as she was winding down, she said it was like a wind down toy, those tin toys that used to get you'd wind
Yeah.
up and they go jit, 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 jit. And she said, I feel like a wind up toy who's just slowly winding down. But when she died, all the natal grass was out everywhere. So it was the winter time. And there was just this beautiful kind of pink fluff all along the roads. And I took some pictures and I sent them to her, and I said, I'm always going to now find you in the natal grass. It's, I don't know, these rituals bring joy. They give us lines of connection and ways of loving after all of the ways that we knew how to love are lost to us, and it's sometimes they come easily and sometimes we need to locate them. Sometimes we need to practice and find them. And it's not easy. You kind of have to build a muscle for it sometimes.
It's funny that you say that because that was when I was recovering from my car accident and doing the rehab. It was one of the things that was part of our homework and our refiguring of how to find, I suppose, joy in a life that had been quite changed. And they referred to them as joy rides. So that was our task that we had to do, is that on a daily basis, we had to find a joy ride. And for me, those joy rides were going on a dog walk or a walk in nature and finding something that I hadn't seen previously. So whether
Mm.
that was a new flower or a new leaf coming up to bud, whether it be a ladybird, whether it be a rainbow, whether it be caught in a shower of rain. But it was really amazing when you do exercise that muscle, as you were referring to, how much more you then see.
Yes. And so then imagine if we apply that presence and intentionality to each other. Oh, it's the goosies. That's what we're missing. And in a time where we are so, so lonely, when there's an epidemic of loneliness, that's what we need for each other. We live in the same house, but we don't, we're ships in the night. We're so, so busy. I sat out with my daughter on Sunday and we just sat in the garden because it's been so, so wet that we haven't been able to do that. And we just sat in
Yeah.
the garden, talked and played and watched the bees. And she said to me, Mum, this is so nice. It feels like a really long time since we did that. And it is because we hadn't been in the garden for so long. But that presence and attention, it's meaningful, is nourishing, it's soul nourishing.
And tell me, how do you encourage individuals and families to sort of embark on this path and have more open conversations? How do you suggest that people do that?
It's so different every time. You have, I'm traveling, I'm companioning a beautiful man at the moment, and he is so open and he's having all the right conversations with his family, and he's prepared, and he's just really, really open and willing to have difficult conversations, and it's incredible. But then I've been with other people who are not dying right up until they're active dying and who just refuse point blank. And it's not my job. It's not my job to make somebody understand or get them to do some truth telling. That's not my job. My job is just to love them. My job is just to work through what comes up. Here are some invitations. Here is a process. Of course, here is a framework that we can move through. What of these things have you completed? What feels important to you? But also it's, I don't know, life has so many forms and frameworks, and sometimes there's more value in just humanizing, just being with. I remember when I was training in dementia, and they gave me this flower thing. So, what music do you like? Have you had pets? And I was just like, have we really lost the skill of having a human conversation with somebody, to just presence them and be genuinely interested and curious about them? Where have we gone so wrong?
And what was interesting that I find that you said earlier is the fact that the need to fix it, that we don't always have to feel like it's our role to fix something. Sometimes it's better just to be with that person.
It's it. People sometimes say to me, what do I say to somebody who's just lost their husband or their child or their dog or has had a miscarriage? I love you. This is really shitty. Am I allowed to say that? This is really
Yeah.
hard. This is really hard. And there's nothing more to be said. It's just showing up. And I think this is what we don't do well, is this kind of consistency in showing up to each other. It's like, oh no, I don't feel like it tonight. I'm too tired. or oh, got a bit of a headache, or I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts. I don't feel like I can kind of, be exuberant or be funny or perform. And it's like, you know what? What if we just remember how to be with each other in whatever shape we're in? It's actually okay to go to your friend's house and put the kettle on and sit in different rooms and read a book. You're just there. Or to take a beach walk and not talk at all. This is what we have with family. And so, what if we started sometimes? Some people have this with family.
Yeah.
What if we could just be, yeah, just be together without going, oh, I've only got half an hour and let's have dinner, but in 6 weeks from now. And if you think about caring and deathing or dying and grieving, it's being, slowing down and being. It's staying overnight when somebody has just lost somebody, when somebody has died. And you go, you know what? I'm going to be here this week with you. And then after that, somebody else is going to be here for another week. Or it's after the ceremony, and then everybody goes back to their lives, and the bereaved are left to their own devices. What happens then? It's we need these ecologies of care to kind of go in and go, you know what, I'm going to show up every day, or I'm going to text you every day for a month. And after that, I'm going to text you every week for a month. And after that, I'm going to text you every month for a year. This continuity of showing up and just being without performance. I feel with all this, with the social media, everything's such a performance. You need the good clothes and the great car and the second house and the what I see at the end of life is people downsizing without all the stuff. You can't take your fancy car with you. It's very humbling, I think, to be in the presence of somebody who is really grieving. And it's very loving to contain that. And what I mean by containment is to wrap around that person and not hold space, but to wrap around that person and say, here we are. Let's see what wants to reveal. Maybe nothing, maybe no talk, maybe some quiet words, maybe we'll listen to a song, but then just showing up again after that and after that. It's this participation, being with, reciprocity, all these yummy, yummy words, you know, that we forget in our busy lives. Looping back to this ritual, when somebody dies, we buy all these flowers. It's like, bring a plant that needs watering so that that person who's bereaved can tend something and look forward to it blooming. When Uncle Magpie died, I was given, his ex-partner gave me a peace lily. And a year after he died, I got that peace lily and I separated it and planted more. And it keeps going. And I have him now in more rooms than I had before, you
What a
know.
beautiful thing.
Hmm.
And tell me, how do you find people respond when they participate in the different workshops you offer? I know you have How Grief Moves, and then you've got the coffin weaving as well. Tell me about how that role of doing something and being involved in those sort of workshops help people with these experiences of death and dying.
Few ways. One is some people just really like to talk, this kind of idea of talk therapy, to just get it out and tell the stories and verbalize it. But not everybody is like that. Some people really need to move their bodies. Honestly, all of us really need to move our bodies and need to move grief through and with our bodies. Some people really value making, and the thing about making something is that you drop into a different kind of space. It's like a buffer. It's not confronting. Sometimes you sit in a group setting, in a circle setting, and you just think, oh, there's always going to be one that talks too much, and I don't really have capacity to listen to everybody's stories. And then some people really like that. It really helps them contextualize their own feelings and locate themselves in the experience of loss. But yeah, the making, I don't know, there's something really kind of old and ancient about making with your hands, and you access a different part of your psyche. Almost like, when you do somatic writing and you think, oh wow, that was surprising. I didn't realize that was there. It's like, oh wow, that old grief again. Or gee, I haven't thought of that memory for a really long time. And listening to people kind of sharing as they're making is a very non-confrontational way of tending loss or learning about difficult subject matter. And it's a way also of working with metaphor. Weaving is a really, really beautiful metaphor to work with. I've got a workshop, a little morning workshop coming up where we're doing cyanotype. And so working with the color blue, why do we use blue in grief? What does that actually mean? And what's the color theory of blue? And what are some of the stories? And we talk about Maggie Nelson's Bluets. And it's so rich with metaphor that the storytelling is a more palatable way of dealing with really difficult subject matter, I guess. And it's a way of creating shared experiences, which is also lasting. People create their own relationships, particularly with something like the coffin weaving that happens over a couple of days, that creates new relationships. Or sometimes I'll run a program over 7 weeks. And it's really interesting that about 4 weeks into everybody showing up to each other and themselves, there's a kind of intuitive sense, there's a resonance that starts to take shape in the group. And they'll say, oh, this happened. And then somebody else will say, oh, yeah, I was also thinking about that. Or something like that happened for me as well. And we've lost that as well. We've lost that thing that happens when we spend a lot of time together that we kind of take for granted, I think, with our close friends and family. But when we start spending time in people's realms, you start attuning on a different level.
A few things that I'm picking up in the fact that we don't have to present ourselves to be this particular image or this particular caricature to then present to someone else. We should just be there and
Yeah.
whatever shape or form that is. And it seems to be there on a more regular basis than what we currently are. So it allows for these moments of just going for a walk together, sitting there having a cup of tea together. So there's more of that connection. Would that be fair to say?
I think that's it, Catherine. I think just really intentional time together. It is so strengthening, it's so soul nourishing for us as individuals, but it's also really bonding for us as human beings to be in this way together. And, yeah, without the kind of rhetoric and without the performance. And this is, I think, really truly what keeps me in this work is the purity, the honesty, the frankness, the humor. There's no BS.
No.
It's real. And sometimes I find it really difficult in other circles to kind of figure out where I am, what the social etiquette of this, or if you've had my kid a couple of times, am I supposed to now have your kid a couple of times? This kind of always balancing. And the thing that caring and dying and grieving, you just you can just love and just be honest and authentic, and there's no guesswork. It's real in a very, very performative world that we live in. It's real. I can trust it. I know where I'm at. It's authentic and genuine. I had a situation one time. I was on a panel discussion, and a woman came up and said to me, "Wow, that was so great. I really valued what you said, and you're so authentic." And I kind of did a double take, and I thought, "Wow, we've gone so wrong. We have strayed so far off the path that now authenticity is some kind of beacon." Like it's an anomaly.
And it's interesting because, you're so true in the fact that there's no bullshit when you deal with this industry, and when you actually see on a daily basis what people are dealing with at the last stages of life and
Mm.
the impact of that are of on loved ones around. And it's interesting that you mentioned earlier that everything else drops away and it comes back to those very simple things that people want around them, and a lot of them being connected to nature. What are the sort of, is there any themes that you've found that when people are dying, what their preferences are or what their choices are?
Oh, it's so different. It's so different. One guy, literally 20 minutes before he died, wanted a cigarette. Yeah, like, and I lit him up. It's what he wanted. I was like, okay, but I am not staying in the room. Just letting you know. Like, you want to do that, that's fine. The window's open. Like, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to be there while you do that.
Yeah.
And I'll be right back after. Yeah, it's so different. It's so different for everybody. More than one person, actually. I can count on a hand. People have said, I want you around because you don't annoy me. Now, I'm sure my daughter would really like disagree with that, like vehemently. But yeah, I think what people want is love, love and connection. I mean, and again, not everybody. Some people don't. Some people would rather slip away on their own without everybody by their bedside. And that's okay too. Some people want to be sung over by a threshold choir or somebody of their family singing or some music playing, people playing guitar or the cricket on or the telly. Like everybody is different. I mean, low lighting. I mean, and I'm talking about active dying, like low lighting and yeah, and sometimes not any sound.
And
Yeah,
maybe
but
just
it's
explain that active dying stage, just in case people are unfamiliar with what that term means.
so when I talk about active dying, I mean like really the end of the end stage. And so that can be from 3 months. It can really kind of kick in 3 months and it can kind of go on and on. And this is why in the active dying stage, sometimes people say, oh, I think we're getting close. And then it's like, oh, I've got to get back to work. I can't wait around here forever, kind of thing. So it can go on for some time, a little bit like, I mean, death is a labor, right? So, like a labor could go from 3 hours, 4 hours to a couple of days or longer. But by inactive dying, it just means that our bodies start to wind down. We are not really as hungry or as thirsty as we were before. The skin can get quite splotchy because the heart is starting to beat slower. Often people get very, very cold because the circulation is a lot slower. But equally, sometimes people can get very hot and it can oscillate hot and cold. The breathing becomes less. People might not have the energy that they had before, but our lovely friend Liz, our dear friend Liz, I mean, she was lucid. She was so clear. And she called me and she said, I really can't believe that in the next 24 to 48 hours, I won't be here. She was clear, lucid as you like. She was of the Baha'i faith and she was very, very practiced in her faith. But I mean, regal, just so, so clear, so, so clear. Some people might be just very, very drowsy. They might slip into unconsciousness, whereas somebody like Liz was very, very clear right up until the end.
And how important is it for people to have a community around them to support them?
Vital, vital. They say we need four. New South Wales Palliative Care talks about having you four people so that your primary carer doesn't get absolute burnout. But four people also it's not a lot. Then there's other research that says, it takes 16 people for somebody to die at home. It takes 16 people for somebody to die at home. Well, and that might be specialist palliative care in the GP, maybe there's an OT or a speech therapist, or maybe there's a dietitian or whoever your team is, but that's also your carers, maybe somebody of faith, maybe, a couple of neighbors, friends, family, whatever. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, counting 16 people, really close people that you could call on, I don't know how many people can really do that. You might have a handful of friends that, that are like your besties, you're kind of in a posse, but are they going to be there as you're winding down, as Liz would say?
Mm.
I think that we invest so much time in our work and not enough time in our relationships. And the chances are that with medicine being the way that it is, that we are likely, if we don't die suddenly, that we are going to be living with comorbidities. And by that, I mean multiple diagnoses or multiple ailments. And, yeah, so what does that look like for us? When I read the seniors paper locally here in the Byron Shire, people are really struggling. Tradies want to charge them $250 to change a light bulb. They're living on sandwiches, and we think that there are so many resources available, but there are not enough people caring for the people who need support. That's it. This is where the compassionate communities piece really comes in. You don't have to be best friends with your neighbours up and down the street. You don't have to do that. But you want to check in on each other from time to time. And also, that builds a space and a trust and a relationship so that when somebody does lose somebody, or when you do, somebody dies in your close network, that there's already kind of threads of relationship that you can kind of lean into. So you don't have to do it on your own.
And can you tell us a little bit about, I know that you're not an expert in it, but just your experience with Compassionate Communities Australia and what you've seen of the model that they're trying to bring into Australia. And I believe that it's based on the UK model that, so if you can just talk a little bit through that, and because I think it really is, from my understanding, very much trying to replicate what your mum was doing at home all those years ago.
Boom. That's what it is, Kathy. I mean, that's the kernel of it. Is just be kind. You know, just be kind to people. Pay attention. If somebody's lawn hasn't been mowed in a really long time, you might want to just pop a note in the mailbox or knock at the door and holler over the fence, like, can I give you a hand? If you go out for an evening walk or a morning walk, you will encounter people. Have a conversation. Just do that. It's as simple as that. We don't all have to be best friends, but I can tell you after a couple of floods and bushfires and COVID that our street network is so tight, so tight. And I know that if I've got a flat tire, my neighbour will let me know. If I've left my lights on, or, if I go away on holiday and I need someone to keep an eye on the house, I have a number of people that I can rely on up our street. If there's excess something in the garden, my neighbour, Ken, will grow silver beet. He will grow just to be able to give fresh vegetables to neighbours. He won't eat them himself, but he will grow them in order to be kind, and he will fix somebody's bike. He will go and snipper the lawn. Like, he's so active in this community, and he knows everybody and everybody knows him. And we've lost that. So compassionate communities is really just start in your own home, start with your neighbours, start with your street, and that feeds into community. Participate, get active, care, pay attention. But they also have a really wonderful program around super connectors. And super connectors, then it means that, not everything rests on your shoulders, because as we know, particularly with women, all the time, everything, the emotional labor of life can get heavy. So the idea of a super connector means that you have knowledge and you can redirect and link people up with the tools and the supports and the resources that they need. And this is really, really powerful stuff, because then again, it's not on you. I don't have to go and hang out with Joey down the road. And, I wasn't in the war, he's a veteran, but I can bring in somebody, like I could bring in an OT, for instance, who works with veterans. And so that kind of trust then would be
Mm.
there. Or I could, if I know that somebody's unwell and they play piano, then I could know somebody else in our community that can also play piano, or I can reach out. It's like this kind of PR job, and
Yeah.
and women, like, we are hardwired for networks. It's, if you've got a startup enterprise, you want women on the job because they will network like crazy and build. And this is why you see book clubs and bowls and tennis and coffee mornings and the big morning teas. And like this is what we do as women. We bring people together. Not all of us, obviously, some of us feel introverted, but to become a super connector is a really powerful thing in a community. But it doesn't have to be another thing to do. It's like, who are you and where are you at? And what are your skills and resources and knowledge? And how can you be in service to your community with what you have without doing too much more?
And I think you give a great example about just starting in your own backyard. And where if someone's going away and you notice that their papers, being lying in the driveway, pop it somewhere where it's, away, and so it doesn't clearly scream that, I'm away on holidays, or take people's bins in. It was something that we in our street certainly did. There was someone who was, I would say, was a super connector in our street, and now it's taken the form since COVID that every Easter we have an Easter egg hunt for the kids on the street. We have a little sticker that we put on our mailbox, and we have a morning tea together. And then we do the same at Christmas time as well. And it just means that for those 2 times a year, we connect with other people in the street that we may just fleetingly say hello to. But it is nicer to feel part of a larger community and to know,
Yeah.
like you said, that if you leave your lights on, someone will let you know. And tell me about the Bay FM. So is this a new evolution for you, Emma?
This is,
What's happening?
yeah. Well, that's pretty exciting. So last year, I was invited onto one of their other programs a few times. And then one of the hosts, really, she said to me, "Oh, well, you should just have your own program." And I thought, "Oh, well, I hadn't thought of that." And so she said she encouraged me to apply. It was a bit of a process, but we got there. And so I'm so grateful for that invitation. And I just think community radio is such a wonderful platform to be able to remind people of how to be kind to each other. So it's called
Yeah.
Regard with Emma. And the idea is, yeah, to really have regard for each other and for the place that we live and what does that look like. And obviously weaving in the themes of caring, dying, and grieving as being a way to turn towards each other and care. And so yeah, I'm really excited. That starts on the 16th of June.
And what region does the Bay FM cover? Because it's 99.9 FM.
Mhm.
And what is the region that you'll be covering?
It's the Byron Shire region, Northern Rivers Byron Shire region, but you can stream it. You can stream it online.
Oh, that's so
Um,
exciting.
yeah, but I contacted Haley West, who has Dead Air, and I just said, okay, hot tips, like go, like what do I need to know? Because it feels very, I mean, you're a very practiced host, Catherine, but for me, seeing that the decks, like kudos to DJs because
Oh yeah,
it's
it's
like a
very
whole nother,
confusing.
it's
Yeah.
another language.
Yeah, it is. It is. Like when I go into our local radio station here, I'm overwhelmed by all the buttons and
Yeah,
all of the things that you could press that could probably make a real big mistake.
yeah,
So yes,
yeah.
I like my little home studio that I've got, but yeah, that's a whole other ball game, isn't it?
It's a whole other ball game. And so it's got butterflies in my tummy, that's for sure. I definitely feel alive, but I'll have somebody with me for the first couple of weeks before I properly fledge. And yeah, it makes me feel uncomfortable, and it's probably not something that I would have sought out. But when you receive an invitation, and for me, my journey across caring and dying and grieving has been like this. It's been a call and response. It hasn't been something that I did a course and then thought I'll get a nice website and now I'm a death doula. No, it's like, no, it's for me, it's very much been a kind of ripening process and listening and responding.
But I find most people that work in this space are informed by an experience, their own personal experience in either, the death of a loved one or something that they've felt that hasn't sat well with them and they'd like to change it. And so it's it's not a surprise that then you evolve as time goes on because you are just responding to what you're seeing in front of you. So I think this is a very exciting evolution in the Emma Beattie world. So so tell me, will you be having guests on? Have you worked out the format yet?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea, yes, we will, I will have guests. That's like another layer of complexity that I'm going to need to navigate, how to do all the buttons while I'm engaging. So no, the idea is to make it very much around local voices, because what I know from facilitating groups is that people, as I said before, can kind of contextualize themselves and other people's stories. And so we need to normalize death and dying and grief in everyday conversations. We need to bring it back. It's this idea of, kind of life, 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 death is not. It's life, death, life, death, life, death, life, death. And so we need it in our daily conversations, because this is what offers us so much vitality in our
Mm,
lives, is this idea of this could be the last meal, or this could be the last time that I make a cup of tea for this person who's sitting at my kitchen table, or this could be this idea of preciousness of life and relationship. So bringing these conversations into the everyday feels important, and difficult conversations, and opening up how other people ritualize their loved ones, and opening up the complexity of disenfranchised grief and accumulative grief, and what does it mean to have community death care, and how willing are you to participate in the death care of a loved one, like just letting people know what their options are. I have this little kind of snappy thing called, get death sorted, and it's G is for gather the information, and D is for discerning that information, and then S is for sharing that information. So GDS, get death sorted. And so what happens then is that people start to understand what is available and possible.
mm,
It's kind of like people don't know, and then they know too late, and then they say, I wish I had have,
yeah,
every time, like every time. And so I think as a community, yeah, what does it mean to have this amazing platform of Bay FM community radio, and to be able to share with people, well, the smorgasbord of what is possible and available, and then them being able to say, okay, well, I can do it my way. I can
yeah,
do this our way. Well, now I know that I don't have to do that. We talked really early on about the tumble spin of the medical system, can be sometimes not, but oftentimes it's a whole new language to learn, and
yeah,
sets of data and specialists and all the things. But what happens when you have a little bit of knowledge before you need it, so that it's not initiation by fire? You
yeah,
know, that's what happens if we as a community are practiced in the ways. What happens if we have come together multiple times to practice shrouding, so that when we need it, it's available to us and we know how to do that? What happens if I had a group of 11 to 14-year-olds and we were out making water music and out in the river? And I said, if somebody died, you could create music, you could come and you could make a song, and you could celebrate your friend in this way, or your brother, or your sister, or your parent, or your grandparent in this way. Like just opening up possibility. I think we have to kind of imagine what is possible so that we can step into it.
that is a super powerful way to finish our conversation today, I think, Emma. That is so beautiful.
Mm.
I think you should get that on a t-shirt. That should be your tagline. I think it's so true. I think that you have to imagine to then be able to step into it. So I think that that's really beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Emma.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Don't be caught dead forgetting to subscribe. And here are some more videos we know you'll love.